can really improve. So that's interesting. Going back to something that you and I talked about before this call was something that clients do sometimes, or applicants do, I guess, that is very annoying to the officers. And that is when you ask a question, go, hey, it's in the application, just read it. Bad answer, obviously. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? And also anything else that was just kind of like one of those things that just right off, you're going to set the officer in kind of a not super happy mood?
Yeah, that's a huge thing, right? Because the officer, again, it goes back to, does it make sense? So if you're supposed to be this person that's going to manage this, successful business, if you can't even articulate what's in the business plan or the numbers or what your future plans are for growing and establishing the business, how is the officer going to believe that everything that was in the business plan is right? So I think that's a shared, there's a lot of things that officers don't agree on, but I think that's a shared frustration among most consular officers that, if the officer has to feel like they're pulling information out of you and then, they think that a third party, an attorney did it, and that you're really not who you say you are if you can't articulate what's in the application packet, especially the business plan, right? So that's definitely huge. The other thing is like yes and no answers. I know there's a lot of stuff on the internet, circulating around that people say, oh, give short answers because then you're not giving, too much information to the officer. Like that, I wholeheartedly disagree with that, right? That's frustrating to an officer, because if the officer has to spend, the 2 to 3 minutes that they have to do this interview, keep in mind for their own promotion, the officer's concerned about their own career, right? So you want to make sure that you give the officer what they need to make the adjudication, right? So, they've got a number of cases that they have to get through in that day. And if they don't, they get dinged for their promotion, right? So they're trying to process the case as soon as they can, as fast as they can. And if they have to take an extra 2 to 3 minutes to figure out what's going on, because you keep saying yes, no, and you're not giving, longer answers to give the officer the information they want from the question that they're asking, that just gets frustrating for the officer. And that can lead, unfortunately, to a denial just because they get tired of trying to get the information that they want out of you. Again, it goes back to, they need to justify the decision. If they can't get the information out of you in 1 or 2 questions, it's making it harder for the officer. So I think generally speaking, those are, yes and no questions are your own, your own worst enemy if you give yes or no questions answers, in my opinion. And then yes, well, it's there. I'm not sure what those numbers are, but it was all in the stuff that my attorney put together for me, right? I mean, officers have this kind of love-hate relationship with attorneys with E-2 visas. Most officers appreciate that an attorney, went through and make sure that all the boxes are ticked and all the regulations are addressed, and the cover letter is really important. For other visa classes, I think that's less the case. And so, you wanted to make it about you. You don't want to make it about, the attorney that did the case for you or about anything else. You want to make the interview about you as the applicant, and this is why you qualify, and you need to be able to articulate that.
Interesting. So I learned something today, because I normally tell my clients to be very short with their answers. This is the deposition training, right? Like, don't get into stuff you do not want to go down a path you do not want to go down. But maybe there's a happy medium between well, I was going to do this, except for then my brother told me that I could start, that kind of answer where we're like off the beaten path for sure, or the yes, no, because I normally tell them keep your answers very, very short. They'll ask you if they want to know more information, but maybe there's something in the middle there to keep short answers, but so they don't have to keep asking yes or no questions. Are you trained, though, to not ask yes or no questions? That seems like a poor questions, or they don't even care to just say ask what you need to ask?
Yeah, not necessarily. You're not really told, any specific line of questioning. An officer, after doing, multiple interviews, will kind of get their go-to questions and have their own set of questions that, I feel like I still could recite those in my sleep, right? Like after you do, 200 interviews in a day, you have your go-to set of questions that you ask based on the, the visa type you're adjudicating. So there isn't really a manual or suggested questions, but an officer will kind of, come up with their own set of questions. But yeah, there is the fine line, right? Absolutely. That's the other thing that could get you into trouble, is if you start talking about something that's not relevant at all and not at all what the officer asked. That also will get the officer being frustrated. And again, going back to time, they're very conscious about time, right? So if you start, going off in left field and giving the officer more information on what they need to know, that's also a problem. So it is really, and that's why what we think, as a former consular officer, that's what I kind of think the value is, that I can help, prepare applicants to kind of, you don't want to sound too rehearsed and too practiced, but feel comfortable with making sure you get the right amount of information out without too much information, but also not enough information. So it is really, there is a fine, there is a specific sort of amount of, and it takes practice. Yeah. It's an intimidating process, as everyone knows, but yeah, there is kind of that fine line that you don't want to cross over, in my opinion.
Right. So let me ask you that, because you talked a little bit about, there are how many interviews? Now, London's a very busy office, right? Toronto, Mexico City, Ciudad Juarez, Tokyo, there's a variety. But let's put yourself in a middle ground. Let's put yourself in like Oslo, right? Like, you're not going to have hundreds a day, but how many interviews? Because in Oslo, maybe they don't even, I'm not 100% sure that they have an E2 visa unit or someone that generally does them. But they would be obviously much less than London or Toronto or any of these other places. But how many interviews would someone be expected to do in an E2 unit? And then if you just are kind of taking everything, like how many interviews a day, like ballpark, does somebody need to do?
Yeah, if you're in those smaller posts that maybe only have one or two consular officers, then you're probably only doing maybe 60, 60 to 100, or maybe even less than that a day.
A day,
so,
each.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like when I was in Sierra Leone for a short, exchange program, they took me from Juarez during, and they only had one consular officer in Sierra Leone, and they had an influx of cases because of the DV lottery. So they brought me in to help adjudicate. And we only, even with the two of us, we only did probably, less than 100 a day each, and that's a slow, that's during peak season. So if you're in a really small place, you're probably only doing, 50, maybe 50 interviews a day if you're in a really small a place that only has one or two officers.
And then in London, what were you doing?
London, I thought was slow because I went to London after Juarez, and in Juarez we did close to almost 500 a day. We were doing like four yes,
per person.
Yes, it was crazy. I think
are there even 500 minutes in a workday?
I think, well, that included visa waiver cases too. So like, the renewals because we had border crossing cards. So it was a little bit different because we were doing border, but you were doing, it was crazy.
Oh my God. And Juarez takes paper. They don't even have email.
Yeah, it was terrible. I think that's changed. They had more officers come in because they were expecting, immigration reform that was going to require more officers. So I think that might have changed. But yes, that was crazy. So London was more like around the 150 to 200 mark is what we were kind of expected. And that was tourist visas and third country nationals and everything, right? So if you were in the E2 visa unit, sometimes you do E2 visas for the morning, and then you would do regular visas in the afternoon, if there weren't that many E2 visas. But typically, E2, if you were doing just E2s for the day, you might only get like 20, 25 cases, quite a lot. Yeah.
That's still a lot when you've got these applications, right? Because the applications are much more robust than an application for like an F1 or something. I mean, it's just kind of, it's there or it's not. With the E2, there's a lot kind of a variance, right? So interesting. So even somebody so everybody's going to be responsible for about 100 interviews a day, whether they're E2s or something else or a combination thereof or something. So keeping that in mind, obviously bullet points, headlines, highlighted, that kind of stuff, that's all very important. So now, and I mean, Anna, I could talk to you for the next 4 hours because I've got all of my own questions. But one thing I do want to cover before we kind of end